Well, a big Friday afternoon hello to you all, particularly those of you who are in beautiful downtown Australia. To those of you in Glasgow, as you see the sun rising, a very good morning to you. Welcome to day 5 of G'day Glasgow. And today we're going to be looking at the seminal events that have been going on overnight Australia time, day 4 for our friends in Glasgow, as we trek across the almost conclusion of week 1 of the Glasgow Climate Summit. Before we do, though, let us do in the usual way acknowledge that this is being broadcast to you from the land of the Camaragal people, and that we acknowledge their elders past, present, and emerging, and welcome in particular any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Island people who are joining us for this program. Well, day 4, people, what a day, dedicated to energy and specifically to coal. The UK has repeatedly stated that it wants the Glasgow climate talks to be the momentum where coal power is consigned to history. Well, day 4 was Judgment Day, and there was a flurry of announcements from countries around the world confirming plans to unhinge their economies from the most polluting of fossil fuels. We'll get to those in just a minute, but first, let's hit the corridors and the outside to discover the weird and the worthy. All right, Pikachus. I've never heard of them before, but apparently they were there. Pikachus. They were there in Madrid for COP25, and now they're in Glasgow. Apparently, a troop of Pikachus are here to demand that Japan stops funding overseas coal by 2030, which is quite a challenge, and that they curb their own coal addiction. The Japanese government is presently planning to finance a number of coal plants in Bangladesh and also in Indonesia. The action was organised by members of the No Coal Japan Coalition, which is an alliance of over 35 environmental groups. Japan seems to have made no new commitments during Energy Day on coal, and we'll get to what was actually made. But gee, they look cute. Meanwhile, the question of adaptation did come up as well. It wasn't all energy-related news during the course of the day. While the agreements on the end of financing of coal projects were more than welcome, and we'll hear about those, the UN research has highlighted the enormous funding gap towards climate adaptation planning and initiatives in advance of a theme day on the issues next week. The UN Adaptation Gap Report, which was released yesterday, our time, concludes that a 5-fold to 10-fold increase is needed in total events of climate adaptation finance by 2030. It states that the cost of adaptation looks set to reach the higher end of the $140 to $300 billion each year by 2030, and potentially rising to $500 billion by 2050. This is for developing countries alone. In stark contrast, the financial flows that have been provided to developing countries for mitigation and adaptation sat at, anybody want to guess? $79.6 billion in 2019. But it's not an understatement to say that it was a busy day, full of energy around the venue. The theme of the day was, of course, energy, and in particular, energy transition, with a number of events aimed to show resolve to end unabated coal use. Or as Richie Merzian of the Australia Institute, who joined us on the program on Tuesday night, said, and he's been going to COP now since 2007, he said, and I quote, "The one thing I've never seen in fossil fuels being taken, this is the one thing I've never seen in fossil fuels being taken head on. Here it is happening and being led by the conference president." Nations are now choking out coal finance. The UK COP26 president, Alok Sharma, gave a plenary speech on the beginning of the day of the 4th, noting how nations had overnight agreed to an array of initiatives to phase out coal, including new members that have agreed to end the financing coal by the end of this year. Sharma claimed that net zero commitments now cover 90% of GDP, up from 30% when the UK took up the COP presidency. What was really important, I thought, though, was that the day started with a discussion about the science. In a special event, the IPCC demonstrated the effects of fossil fuel production and the use and other drivers of climate change. Members presented key findings in the working group contribution to the IPCC assessment report, which focuses on the physical science basis of climate change. The International Energy Agency has claimed that reaching global net zero by 2050 is going to require all countries and businesses to stop construction of new coal-fired power plants and phase out existing plants completely by 2030. And what a day it was. The International Just Transition Declaration was signed. The UK government marked COP26 Energy Day by launching a new International Just Transition Declaration, which commits nations and organisations to ensuring that the move away from coal and high carbon industries creates new green jobs and opportunities for society, especially in emerging countries. So far, 12 countries, and before you ask in the chat, no, not Australia, have signed the declaration, including the UK and the EU Commission. The news comes after the UK had signed the International Just Transition Partnership with South Africa, and we'll be talking to Joanne Yawitch in just a moment about that particular development. The second announcement was the Global Coal to Clean Power Transition Statement. More than 190 countries, including China, Poland, and other major coal users, national banks and vulnerable nations signed up to new measures to end new coal domestically and internationally, while also working out to phase out existing coal capacity and to support workers through this particular process. UK Business and Energy Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng, and I'm sure I'm going to be picked up by Linden about my pronunciation, said that today marked a milestone moment in the global effort to tackle climate change as nations from all corners of the world united in Glasgow to declare that coal has no part to play in our future power generation. And in another historic development, over 20 nations pledged to end overseas fossil fuel finance by 2022. Titled the Statement on International Public Support of Clean Energy Transition, this pledge commits signatories to aligning flows of international public finance with clean energy transition and phasing out of unabated fossil fuels, including coal, gas, and oil, in a way consistent with the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming pathway. But wait, there's more. Powering Past Coal Alliance, a total of 27 new members joined the PPCA, bringing the total membership now to 164 nations, cities, and regions. This builds on the 50 new members that were unveiled at various times throughout 2021, including the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And with these additions, 65% of the OECD and EU countries are now members. What was interesting, though, was a report that came out from a leading think tank titled The Paris Effect, and I hope that has nothing to do with the Lynx effect. This report is a study predicting the clean energy technology pathway is actually nearing market tipping points. A major analysis from System IQ, or System IC, argues that rapid uptake of clean technologies could leave high carbon infrastructure stranded within just a decade. Their reasoning, the Paris Agreement has triggered a wave of clean tech innovation set to trigger a series of market tipping points over the next 10 to 15 years, likely to leave billions of dollars worth of high carbon infrastructure stranded. But it wasn't all about coal. In fact, there was an important announcement around energy efficiency. And I'm pleased to say that Australia was part of that announcement. Australia, along with Indonesia, Japan, and Nigeria, have now joined a collaborative initiative steered by the UK government and the International Energy Agency, aimed at reducing, improving the energy efficiency of appliances such as lighting, refrigerators, and air conditioning. And if that ain't enough, the First Movers Coalition, which was announced on Tuesday, gave an update, and interestingly, announced that Boeing, Amazon, and now Volvo Group were confirmed among members of this new coalition, pledging to support the development of low carbon technology for hard to abate sectors such as aviation and the heavy industry. Called, as I said, the First Movers Coalition, the initiative is now being led by the World Economic Forum and the US Envoy for Climate, which is John Kerry, hence the picture, which is a great one. On the day of its launch in Glasgow, the coalition has garnered now the support of 29 founding members, corporates across sectors, including aviation, shipping, trucking, steel, cement, chemicals, and aluminium. And there was an announcement about the green hydrogen standard. But do you think I can find the link in relation to that? So let's now bring in our panel of COP stars, asking them to open up their screens so we can see them. Welcome them to G'day Glasgow. And going around, let me please welcome Joanne Yawitch from the National Business Initiative of South Africa, Linden Edgell, the Head of Sustainability of ERM, and our old friend, and more importantly, Head of Delegation of Business Council for Sustainable Development Australia on ground in Glasgow, one Matthew Warnken. Let's start with Joanne first, because we haven't heard from her yet, nor have we heard from Linden, which we'll move to straight after. Joanne, you're on ground. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What's your impressions thus far of this particular COP?
Okay, so morning, everybody. It's great to be talking.
Or evening, as the case may be.
Oh, yeah, evening, morning where I am, very early morning where I am. I think this COP is really interesting for the, I think for the amount of the kinds of announcements that are being made in terms of bringing together non-government actors, making commitments around climate change. And what I think is really interesting is the volumes and numbers of business people who are attending the COP and the kinds of commitments that companies are making. So I think that, and there are many pavilions where companies of all sizes across all sectors are talking about their climate action. So I think the business community has moved hugely in the last couple of years, beyond what anyone could have ever imagined. I think the second thing that has been really interesting for me, I didn't go to the Madrid COP, but is the numbers of big emitting countries that have got very significant pavilions at the COP. So Saudi Arabia, I've never seen a Saudi pavilion ever before at a COP, and with very full programs of events around decarbonization plans. So I thought that is really interesting. In terms of the negotiations, I think things are moving as they are at this point in the process very slowly. I am not convinced that there's going to be an Article 6 outcome. I hope there will be. I think people are working very hard. But I think that what is happening, and there's a very significant delegation of youth, and today is going to be Youth Day at the COP, and it's going to be very interesting to see what kind of an impact, if any, that has. So yeah, I think climate has become mainstream in a major kind of way. And it looks to me from the announcements that are being made at the COP that the money is to back that is really starting to be put on the table, or at least the mobilization around that is reaching levels of seriousness that we've never ever seen before. So I think that we are in the early beginnings of the fossil fuel phase out. I think this COP might be a landmark COP in that regard.
Well, that's a perfect pivot to Linden. Before Linden says anything, let me properly contextualize Linden. Linden and I have known one another for, in fact, I've known her longer than I've known my wife, which is a bit of an interesting sidebar, but we won't talk about that. And Linden is Australian, but she lives in London as the head of sustainability for ERM. And we were fortunate to have her boss, Karen James, only the other night, come and give her first thoughts as a novice. But Linden, you're not a novice. And I would like to test what Joanne just said about the question of today, or yesterday, technically, being the beginning of the end of coal. What's your take on what happened yesterday?
Yeah, good morning and good evening from Glasgow. I think it is significant. And I think the UK and the presidency have been working very hard to try and get a number of these major initiatives and announcements occurring alongside the COP, knowing that the negotiations around things like Article 6 might be a bit, well, not interesting to many people. So they've worked hard to do this. So I do think it's significant. But I do think that things like the just transition have really got to get, some more airtime, because, well, certainly for countries like Australia, that's where it really impacts, right? It's the communities on the ground who are looking at what those futures are. So I think the just transition's got to get a lot more airtime.
Right, interesting point. And that's why I brought it out in the opening, because particularly the press thus far in Australia has been talking all about Powering Past Coal Alliance and the statements around the cessation of coal financing. But when you look at the importance of the statements around transition, and there were two of them, including the just transition, they're equally significant because they've come out of a COP. And that, to the best of my recollection, has not happened ever. So let's pivot to Matthew and ask you roughly the same thing. What was your take on yesterday?
Yesterday, look, I agree with the comments about there's a kaleidoscope, a flurry of activity in the pavilions, which certainly I haven't seen before, with the exception maybe of Paris. And it is country after country and pavilion, and all going through the same similar themes in terms of decarbonisation, in terms of moving to renewables, increasing ambition. And the corporate presence, again, cannot be underestimated. And that really builds on that launch of the WBCSD and their business climate recovery manifesto, and this idea of corporate determined contributions. And the size, huge companies, billions of customers. And then raising this issue in terms of, well, actually the climate solutions is in the center. Fair and just transition is about mainstreaming these solutions. It's about grappling in terms of, well, where are those new jobs coming from? How will we phase out reliance on fossil fuels and a focus on innovation? And I have to also say too, it has been great having an Australian pavilion. So that is a novelty. I can confirm all the rumours are true about the quality of the coffee.
Oh, right. Joanne, you need to talk to Matthew. You need to talk to Matthew.
Oh, we can have a coffee off South Africa versus Australia on the coffee front. So that creates a hub of activity. The Minister Taylor's been there with advisors, hosting a whole bunch of meetings. So it's created a bubble of activity. George Brandis, High Commissioner to the UK, also have been around there, as have been a number of really senior business leaders, which like Andrew Forrest, Fortescue Future Industries, Kevin Gallagher from Santos. Obviously they were there around in the pavilion, as were a number of invited climate solutions companies, hydrogen company H2X Global, Sophia Hamlin Wang with Mineral Carbonisation International. And we will also be trying to broadcast from the pavilion on Monday night. Agriprove and Corporate Carbon have invited to be at the Australia Pavilion, showcasing what we're doing in Australia. And one of those things is direct air capture alongside partners, Southern Green Gas. So a lot of activity, a lot of focus, and a lot of grappling in terms of how do you finance, how do you deliver that in the mainstream, and that sort of brings front and center the kind of the undercurrents of where's the fine line between ambition, where's greenwash, and how do you engage with large corporates who need to be part of that transition, part of that mainstreaming, without every time a corporate makes a move, it just gets labeled as greenwash. I don't know that the answers have been forthcoming, but you almost get the feel that greenwash is a term that really doesn't have relevance to our mainstreaming center climate solutions agenda of activity.
Let's pick up on that and go back to Linden. Two things. Your take on the release of the WBCSD's climate recovery report, the business manifesto, and Matthew's last point in relation to the accusations or the history of greenwashing. And I want to get your views on particularly the announcement yesterday of the IFRS Foundation and the coming together of the CDSB and the Value Foundation under the auspice of the foundation to launch the International Sustainability Standards Board?
Yeah, I'll start with the Standards Board first. I think it's a great move. We do need to work towards harmonisation. As someone who leads the reporting efforts in my own company, and we're privately held, we're not publicly held, but the reporting requirements are becoming extraordinary. And like every reporting lead, I prefer to spend more time on action than on different versions of the same form that every different institution or a financer or whatever wants. So in that respect, I think it's important. I do have a slight sense of nervousness that the focus will become on accounting standards for investors, and it's way more than that. As much as I love the accountants, Andrew, I'm
a lawyer.
I'm a lover,
not a fighter.
Yeah, but coming from a company where we actually look at, we have the specialists in all the topics. Numbers tell part of the story; they don't tell the whole story. And so I guess I have just that slight unease about reducing everything to an accounting standard means that we've solved the disclosure problem. That's not going to work. And so somewhere we need to allow for accountability to other stakeholders, and disclosures are an important part of that, both in a quantitative form, but also in a qualitative form, which leads to the greenwashing kind of argument. How much of the qualitative reporting that's been happening over the last few years kind of ends up more on the desk of the marketing or corporate affairs department than it does on the sort of the subject matter experts. And I think that's still got to play out. In terms of WBCSD's manifesto, I think it's an important platform for business. We've been heavily involved in crafting that manifesto and helping kind of shape how do you get consensus around some of those points on some of the sticky topics. There's 200 members of the WBCSD who have a wide variety of interests, and I think it's important that they've come together and back that manifesto.
Absolutely. Talking about the voice and the story, the one that struck me over the last few days, and it's back to Joanne on this, was the announcement by the EU and the US and the South African president around this transition fund, basically, to support Eskom to decarbonise. I read it, fascinated by it, thought it was quite groundbreaking, but what's the take from South Africa about what its significance is or can be?
Thanks, Andrew, and let me try and explain what has happened. So I think that, I'm sure that people on the line know that the South African energy economy is very similar to the Australian one, except we don't have the money. And particularly not at the moment. So in theory, we are a middle income developing country, but our national balance sheet is highly constrained. Our utility, which provides 80% of our power, and it is coal-fired power, is crumbling. The infrastructure is crumbling. And the country for years now has been subject to two things: to ongoing shedding of load in order to manage demand on the one side, intermittently every so often, but also to very significantly rising power prices. And so in the face of that, we've got to a point where decisions have to be made around what is going to happen into the future. So there's a moment of opportunity in South Africa around that. And the government and the Eskom leadership have worked together for quite a long time now around a future plan for Eskom that involves a transition away from coal and a long-term phase out of coal plant. So the plan is that by 2030, around 22 gigawatts of Eskom's coal plant are phased out. And that brings forward, in relation to our national, our integrated resource plan, which sets out how the power system is going to develop. What it does is to accelerate what would have been a process of retiring a whole lot of the aging infrastructure. To be able to do that, and to be able to do that in a way that takes into account the just transition issues. So to take into account primarily the fact that there are well over 100,000 workers and their families. And in South Africa, that means anything between 5 and 10 dependents per person. And to do that in a way that doesn't destroy livelihoods, destroy communities, destroy value chains, requires quite substantial international support. And so I suppose in line with the Paris Agreement, with the commitments around finance, technology, and capacity support, and in line with the commitment of the international community to support developing countries to decarbonize, what has been agreed is that an initial $8.5 billion will be mobilized by, it's the EU, Germany, France, the US, and the UK. And that they will work with South Africa in order that that funding is raised. It's concessional and blended finance. So there will be some kind of a grant element. Most of it will be hopefully highly concessional finance. And that will enable Eskom to retire its power stations earlier than would have been otherwise possible. The other thing that has happened is that there is one demonstration project that is happening at the moment at Komati Power Station, a kind of proof of concept development where that plant is being shut down at the moment. And Eskom is doing a whole lot of repurposing of that plant, including developing what are called an agri-solar. There's an agri-solar project. They are building mobile mini grids that could be used right across the African continent. They are retraining workers. They are looking at a whole set of repurposing developments as proof of concept of how that funding would be used across its plant. So that's what's happening. I think importantly, it moves South Africa. It creates a set of opportunities, and it allows for a much bigger rollout of renewables than we had hitherto seen would be possible. And business, I think importantly, just to finish off, that in the business sector, and the NBI, together with our Apex business organization, BUSA and BCG, have done a whole lot of work to set up a business view of what the net zero 2050 pathways are across a wide set of sectors of the South African economy, including a power sector report.
Wow, comprehensive. And dare one say, and I'm sure Linden and Matthew would agree with me on this, some interesting lessons for Australia out of that as well. Last few minutes. We did get permission last night to go a little over 6:30, but conscious that it's Friday night in Sydney and everybody will disappear on me pretty sooner rather than later. Freeform, what are you looking out for in the next 24 hours? What are you going to be involved in? It's a great day, youth and public empowerment. It's just such a joy to see so many different people that are not me humming around in that particular conference centre every year. It's just wonderful to see the enthusiasm. But what are you all going to be looking at? Joanne, quickly, what are you going to be doing on Friday?
Okay, so we have an event at our pavilion that looks at corporate procurement of renewable energy that brings together public and private sector and looks at how we could open up that opportunity. It's not a youth event. From the youth event, I expect a lot of pushing to move further and move faster. That's fundamentally what it is. There are a lot of big demonstrations planned in Glasgow over the next day or two. Two big ones, one today and one tomorrow. So that's going to be interesting to see how much and how far civil society mobilization can go. But I think that the youth voices have been incredibly well informed, the young people that I've heard. So I really think we're looking at the future, and that's very inspiring.
Very much so. Linden, what are you going to be doing? I know what you're going to be doing, but tell everybody else what you're going to be doing.
Well, we decided, seeing it's Youth and Public Empowerment Day, to actually bring a whole lot of our employees from across the UK. So they're currently on their way to Glasgow via trains and buses. And so I'll have an event today with about 50 or 60 of our employees, including we chose a number of young people, younger end of our spectrum, to come and experience COP and to, I guess, share with us where they think the company should go on some of these topics. So I'm actually really excited about that.
That is fantastic.
Just some logistical challenges as Greta and 100,000 of her best friends are on the streets, but we'll negotiate that from a logistical perspective.
Look, they can share in the blah, blah, blah. Matthew, what will you be doing?
So
apart from drinking coffee on the
for,
Australian Pavilion. Yeah.
Yes, coffee. So maybe not for today, but just a shout out for tomorrow, the launch of Climate Shot, which is all about agricultural agenda for innovation and climate solutions. And there, obviously, the role of progressive regenerative farming practices to draw down carbon out of the atmosphere where it's a problem and put it into soils where it's a fundamental asset. So Agriprove signed up as a climate ally. So I'll be there attending that launch. That's on for tomorrow.
Very good.
And then wandering around COP again today, trying to get the steps up. So I think I'm averaging around 16,000. It's a different COP. It's tighter. Like there's not as expansive.
Oh, really? And okay.
Yeah, and because it's not the same Australian contingent too, Andrew, in terms of the updates and then the room changes, so you don't have that was worth at least 5,000-6,000 steps when you go from one end to the other, trying to find where the delegates were providing the updates. So steps are up, but not quite as high as say Paris, which was like a 25,000 step day every day. This is more like 15 to 17,500 steps.
Oh, so well, I'm glad I didn't go then. Oh, thank goodness for that. All right. Well, thank you to all three of you. That was fantastic. Let me just quickly, let me put you up there so I don't lose you. Let me remind everybody that, yes, you are now here, which is Friday the 5th. It's the Youth and Public Empowerment Day. And the picture on the screen was sent to me by Murray Hogarth, who a number of you may know. His dear wife, Natalie Isaacs, who is the goddess of engagement of community and youth in particular, and the leader of 1,000 women, 1 million women. What am I doing? It's way more than that. Finally got to Glasgow, I think, in the last 24 hours and is already on the ground encouraging, cajoling, and just being absolutely Natalie. So if you get a chance, you three, to go and see her, please give her our love from BCSD Australia. She is an absolute living legend and a force of nature. Very exciting news. I'm not going to show you anything about coming up events because I figured nobody would be going from Australia into virtual mode this time of night. Just to say that tomorrow, Linden will be rejoining us, and we will be joined once again by Melanie Bishop, who has some fascinating insights into the Duke of Cambridge. And we're going to be welcoming Ava Zabi from Business for Nature, because 6th of November is Nature Day at COP. That's it from me. That's it from our speakers, our COP stars. We thank them once again and thank them very much for their contribution. It is very much appreciated, and particularly as you have to get up a little bit earlier than you might want to join us. But can I tell you, there were 75 people who joined on a Friday night in Sydney. Amazing. Couldn't believe it. For now, though, thank you so much. Don't forget, respect nature, respect each other, and respect the science. My name is Andrew Petersen. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye for now.